Welcome to my channel. This is JC Rock and Metal Reviews. My name is John. Today I have a new anniversary review. It is the 50th anniversary of Thick as a Brick by Jethro Tull. This was released on March 3rd, 1971. So in this video I'll be talking about the recording, the musical style, the tour, the album cover, and I'll probably be giving lots of interesting facts about this album. So this album is the follow-up to Aqualung from 1971. So a lot of critics called it like a concept album. They called Aqualung that. But Ian Anderson thought of that album more as just like a collection of songs. So he did come up with the idea of like doing like a concept album. But they wanted to do it in like a humorous manner. So some of the influence for their humor was Monty Python back at that time. But Ian Anderson wanted to make an album that was kind of like a parody of a lot of like big progressive rock albums that were being released at that time. So pretty much the main bands they were trying to parody were like Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Ian Anderson wrote the lyrics to the album, but the writing was co-credited to like this fictional schoolboy named Gerald Bostock. And a lot of people actually thought that he was like a real person. So the band rehearsed the album for 2 weeks in the basement studio owned by the Rolling Stones. Now, at first they had written, short songs, but later they were kind of all like linked together, kind of to create these two long songs that basically comprise the album. It will be like part one on side one of the record and part two on side two of the record. Then they started to record the album in December of 1971 at Morgan Studios in London. So on previous albums, the band would have written everything in advance, but on this one, they had the first section written, and then they went into the studio, and then they finished the writing process in the studio. So they wrote the lyrics to the songs first, then the music afterwards. They recorded the album in about 2 weeks. Then they spent another like 2 to 3 weeks doing like overdubs and mixing. So this was an album where all the members contributed to the writing process, and there were even parts of the album that were kind of like written in a single take. The album is a progressive rock album, often considered like their first like prog rock album. The album does sound like a progressive rock album with lots of like tempo changes and time signature shifts. So the opening section, they call Really Don't Mind. It's kind of like a soft acoustic piece with their like signature flute sound. But the song takes off and kind of goes through many changes as the song progresses. So the album is 2 long songs comprising of one side of the record. Each long song is made up of like shortened songs that are about like 3 to 5 minutes long. Now the songs do mix up a lot of their style with like rock, some classical music and folk music. They use a lot of different instruments on the album, consisting of the usual ones like the flute, the acoustic guitars, the electric guitars, and the Hammond organ. But they also incorporated some other instruments like the harpsichord, the violins, the saxophone, there's a string section. Now, according to Ian Anderson, some of the lyrics were actually inspired from his childhood experiences. As for the album cover, now the original album was very unique. It was a fictional newspaper called the St. Cleeve Chronicle and Linwell Advertiser. And it was filled with articles and advertisements. So they were all done in like this like parody fashion. And at first the record company didn't want to produce the newspaper format for the record, thinking it would be too expensive, but Ian Anderson convinced them to go ahead with it with the argument that, real newspapers are not very difficult to produce. So the fake newspaper also included lyrics to the songs on page 7, kind of in the form of a poem written by that fictional character. The newspaper was mostly written by bassist Jeffrey Hammond and keyboardist John Evan. Most of the articles were funny stories. The overall presentation of the newspaper was created by Roy Eldridge. He was an employee at the Chrysalis record company, and he was previously a journalist, so he had some experience doing that. The characters in the newspaper were also mostly members of the band, as well as like the production team, the road crew, and others. According to Ian Anderson, the cover took longer to produce than the music. The album was eventually released on CD, many years later, and the newspaper was kind of like edited down to fit the packaging, but they did do a 25th anniversary like special edition, and the CD cover, is very close to the original. And the same was true for the 40th anniversary box set version. So after the album was released, the band went on tour and they played the album in full. And they did use a lot of like humor during these live performances. So for example, like during the show, like a telephone would ring and Ian Anderson would answer it. Then there would be some like, news and weather reports, and there would be like a guy in a scuba suit, like, coming on stage, and they did that type of like comedy. And the performance was very well received in most places, except not in Japan. I think for some reason the audience didn't really understand the changes, and they didn't really get in on the joke very well. But otherwise, it was a very successful tour. Many years later, when Ian Anderson was performing as a solo artist with like a backing band, he did release a follow-up called Thick as a Brick 2, and that came out in 2012. I think I did mention that briefly in my review of the latest Jethro Tull album. And that is all. I'll keep this fairly short. I would say it is one of the best albums they've ever recorded. And actually recently did a Jethro Tull ranking. I will post that right there if you're interested in checking that out. In the meantime, please remember, like, comment, subscribe. My next video will be another anniversary for the Body Count album, and I'll see you in the next one.